Hello, it's Sarah. I am here to talk about listening today. So, we've been covering a lot of things, and this kind of goes in right with our last module on groups and team meetings. And we're going to talk about listening. Now, listening is a huge topic. I could spend 10 weeks, develop a whole class on listening. There is obviously group dynamics. There is customer service or sales type of listening that we could apply in business. There's also leadership and listening and leadership styles, which I do want to cover a little bit of all of these different types. But the primary focus of this lecture is really the balance between in an interpersonal communication event. How are you balancing your speaking time and your listening time? And really starting to become a little more aware, developing your self-monitoring skills and how to adapt, which means that in a conversation, we kind of want to understand the dynamics of a conversation, but we also want to look at intercultural communication and how it's impacting our choices. And it really intercultural communication kind of reveals is a better way, reveals a lot of implicit norms that we aren't always aware of. And when we're looking at ways to develop relationships, whether those are business relationships, coworkers, with our supervisors or subordinates, or even in our own personal lives, understanding interpersonal communication can really help. So that's kind of what I want to cover. I want to cover what's happening, what is a conversation, what's happening in it, and look at some of the dynamics. I also want to look at basically turn-taking signals, and then I want to dive into uncertainty avoidance culture and power distance cultures and how that can play out in the way that people interact. And then also, of course, I just think I want to round off this lecture with a little bit about developing your listening skills and how I'm not going to do too much of it because you have the YouTube videos that has a lot of those in there. And also our podcast this week. Our podcast is from Celeste Headley, and she wrote We Need to Talk, and it's how to have conversations that matter. This book I would definitely recommend if you like that interview and want to really start focusing. And I have other book recommendations as well that we will get to as we go along. All right, so let's talk about the conversation. So when we think about conversations, we want to think about how are we self-disclosing? What are we disclosing? And what is the other person self-disclosing? So in a just to get down to the basics, and this is primarily interpersonal dyad communication events that are transactional in nature. So a transactional communication event means that there is a channel-rich interaction. And we say from channel rich to channel lean. So channel rich means there's multiple messages being sent through multiple channels, primarily nonverbal channels. Verbal is only one channel, which I think we've talked about before in this class. So now that we have that foundation, we want to think about what's happening in that transaction. So we have our environment, and our environment is how it's impacting the conversation. Like the location of where you are has a dimension that impacts the relationship, but it also impacts what will be said. And when we think about the relationship dimension, we're looking at what is the dynamic of the relationship. Is it hierarchical? And sometimes the hierarchy is established, has a formal establishment already put on it. For example, if you met with me, I am the professor, you are a student, and that has a formality to it. That's the relationship dimension of that conversation. And it does have an established hierarchy based on cultural norms. Now, some relationship dimensions have more solidarity in them. Like if when you meet in your virtual meetings with other students, you have solidarity, meaning that there's not a hierarchy to that. There is a implicit norms established that you are all on the same level in the relationship with this, not a lot of power dynamics. Now, those are formal labels that are put on us that create those dimensions, but sometimes there's informal things happening. And when that happens, the way that people are talking and the way that people are how they interact might reveal subtleties that are we solidarity or is there a power dynamic going on here? Like, are you talking to me like the way that you talk to your students? Are you talking to me the way that right? So sometimes the way we talk establishes hierarchies. And that is the impact of things like time, how we use time. It's the impact of turn-taking signals and things like that. We'll get more into that. I will reveal that as we go along, how that sometimes shows up. I would say when we are communicators in the environment, we want to think about what is the environment telling us about our identity and who we are. So, for example, where would you go to hang out? The setting of a location, let's say you want to go hang out with your friends. Are you hanging out with your friends at a house with a bunch of roommates, or do you go to a coffee shop to hang out, or do you want to go hang out at the park or the skater park? Or the dog park with all your dogs? Like each of these environments have identity built into them. And if you choose a certain environment, we gravitate towards environments that confirm our identity. This is everything from locations of where we live, right? Regions, we're in the Pacific Northwest, or are you in the Southwest? Or are you on the East Coast? Or Texas, right? Texas is its own region. All of those things have an impact on our identity. So this is the importance of environment. How this plays out in the business world, really, we can see how that showed up during COVID-19 and our remote work that we were doing. All of a sudden, going to work, having a commute, going into our office spaces was part of our professional identity. And then we would go home and there's kind of a break of workplace identity and home identity. And all of a sudden those got moshed and smashed together. And sometimes there was and even today there's a concern is, am I really getting your workplace identity when you're at home? Meaning, are you productive and things like that? Also, in Zoom meetings, everyone is in a completely different environment, right? Someone might have the luxury of a space in their home that's an office space and they can close the door, and maybe they live with only one other person, or maybe they live alone and they have control over the noise in the environment. Where other people, as soon as they got home, there were kids needing to be schooled from home, and there's pets and all these other kind of dynamic entities. And those two people are trying to have a conversation. They're trying to send and receive messages efficiently and productively. But because of different environments, that became an impact. So this is why, And I can go on and on for examples, but I'm excited to hear your examples of how environment affects a conversation. And I mentioned noise. So noise is the other part of a transaction. There's obviously the physical noise of the environment, but there's also psychological noise, and that's our thoughts. So what we know is that our mind moves at a much faster pace than most speaking rhythms. Most people speak at a certain clip. That's the average clip. It'll vary. There's a spectrum of it. That could be based on regions or other elements. But so the person who's in the listening role, their mind has a lot more to do than the speed of the person who's speaking. So that's why we have a tendency to have drift off, or someone says a word and we start thinking about this. Oh, someone just mentioned the oven, and oh, did I turn off my oven this morning? Things like that start popping up like popcorn. And we are in a constant refocusing and demand of attention and distractions that make it difficult. So that would be psychological noise. Physiological noise is anything with the functioning of our body that is grabbing our attention away from whatever it is we're paying attention, trying to pay attention to, whether it's something as simple as your stomach growling because you're hungry, or your stomach growling because you ate something you shouldn't have eaten, or maybe you have a headache, or maybe you have to use the bathroom. So anything that is physiological noise is any function of the body that is interrupting and taking your attention or demanding your attention. So that really brings us to this idea of active listening, but when we get to Celeste Headley, she's going to talk a lot about different types of listening styles in this book. But active listening is the word used for paying attention, basically. That when we are trying to do that and really think about what the other person is saying, that's exhausting for our minds, because there's all this noise happening from all over the place that is demanding our attention. And if you have any devices in front of you, like for example, as I do this interview, one of the things I do is put on the do not disturb, because I need to pay attention to you and I can't have my phone lighting up and dinging all the time, right? So that means that when we're in the listening role and we want to be active listeners, we need to start developing techniques for how we are going to keep our mind towards the speaker. Okay. So we talked about noise and the way that that can create distractions either as the speaker or as the listener. The next thing we want to talk about is reciprocity. So reciprocity is the thing that we do in response to what someone says. So someone says something and then someone says something else, right? And we meet here, and depending on culture and personality and different things, how we respond is going to be different, which is why conversations become so frustrating, because people are coming from such different ways of interacting that we often become very frustrated. So in the reciprocity, I want to talk about two different types of reciprocity. I want to talk about expressive talk and instrumental talk. And I would say the business world demands more instrumental talk and less expressive talk. But depending on your culture and your style, you might find yourself either with someone in a superior role, I don't know, a supervisor role, not superior, a supervisor or managerial role that is doing reciprocity in different ways than you're used to, and you might be developing some frustration to that. Okay, so expressive talk. Expressive talk is when we are trying to move the conversation open. It means we're trying to expand the conversation and allowing more and more things to be put in. Uh, Good expressive talk sounds like great improvisational jazz, right? Wynton Marsalis, he says jazz is like a great conversation. And I love that metaphor from Wynton Marsalis. But basically, we have the saxophone coming in, do 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 do, and then the trumpet. We have a little piano and a little bass, bum 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 bum, and all of these instruments are laying on top of each other, and each one bringing an emotion and a new perspective and a new point of view, and it moves the conversation open, and it makes room for others. And all of a sudden, we might pay more attention to the bass, and it might do a little bit of it might take the attention as the other instruments move into different rhythms to give it more expression. And then the trumpet comes in and it's going to take its role in dominating the conversation when the other ones are listening and adding in undercurrent. So this is my metaphor or analogy for good expressive talk. It usually is going to include a lot more emotion in it. And that's one of the telltale signs that you're in a more expressive conversation. It's also going to have a lot more context. I want to talk more about the history. I want to get more of this. In the world of business, we do not see expressive talk being used for as much. And what we see in the world of business is instrumental talk, and instrumental talk is where we are taking a conversation. We start a conversation, we have a problem, we need to have a goal that we need to get to, and the conversation is moving towards its point or moving towards its solution. So the conversation is actually doing the opposite. We are now going to take things out and we're going to get narrower and narrower and closer to the point. The end. And this is like a problem solution style of speaking. It does have a tendency to move towards we want to narrow down what information we actually need. So that means that my analogy here, because we had an analogy for expressive talk as jazz, the analogy for instrumental talk is chess. This is like a game of chess. And it's like, I know this, and I know this, and I knew that, so we don't need to talk about that anymore, but I do know this, so let's focus on that. And that person says, well, I already knew that. Now we're going to move towards this. So we're getting narrow and narrow and narrow and getting to solving that problem. So like in chess, we are moving towards a goal of the end of the game, and we are eliminating information, and we're eliminating the other person's information, and it has a little bit of a competitive element to it. There's this thing that we're getting toward, if we can get towards the solution. So expressive talk wants to squash the power. It wants to say, okay, we all have these ideas and we all have something to contribute, and let's get it all in there. Often expressive talk is diminished and pushed away in the world of business because it is considered a waste of time. Where instrumental talk, which sometimes those conversations can go even longer than expressive talk, but because it has that competitive feeling and there's this establishing of a hierarchy, I knew this, well, I already knew that, and I know this, well, I knew this, and I knew that, and I know that. And now we're getting to the point, right? That this hierarchy is creates power positioning is probably the best way to do it. So both of these have advantages and disadvantages to them. I would say most dysfunctional or toxic cultures can come out of both of these places, because each one is asking for you to become an over talker and move more into talking and less into listening. So here we are at really important part of this lecture of thinking about how are we contributing to the conversation, but not over talking and expanding our words. But we want to now move back into a listening role. So talkaholics, over talkers, they're career killers. Often over talkers, and this is different than introvert and extrovert. Okay, so let's be clear. You can be an introvert and have over talking tendencies. And that can sometimes come out of insecurities or a desperation or a need to be included. And so you develop techniques of over talking. And this is usually in interpersonal encounters, one-on-one. And if an introvert is in a power of leadership and they get an assistant or an administrative assistant or a subordinate that has to interact with them, they can move into over talking as well. So I'm not talking about introvert, extrovert. Those are different ideas, which in my book recommendations, Quiet by Susan Cain is a great book about the power of introverts in a world that can't stop talking, right? So in over talking makes a great, those people who are really good at talking, they've had a lot of practice. They know how to get in there and get it done. They can often come up with a good idea because they know how to, they're blurters. They often blurt out ideas over other people and they can come up with great ideas. They know how to get in there and sell their idea. But often they lack filters. Sometimes these people do zingers or teaser things that erode trust. And even if people are laughing and it seems like you're having a good time, when research shows that they will choose not to work with that person again, as in the bad apple, they talked a bit about the over talker person, right, as one of the bad apples. They had a different word for it, but that it's usually the one who's the just jumping in all the time and doing a lot of humor and teasing. Okay, anyway, my mind went off. There goes. My mind did a distraction and it went poof. So let me stay focused so I can get this done. So they make a good primary effect, a first impression. So often we're like, wow, this person really knows some ideas. We're going to hire him. But then over time, we're like, wow, this person is just, we are eroding trust. They are distracting us from getting work done. And in fact, trending in workplaces right now, because this is becoming such a thing, is quiet work days or a quiet work week. They'll also have no meeting Mondays kind of thing and quiet time on the floor. Corporations are starting to develop this to try and combat or make over talkers or more aware of themselves. So let's get in there and start monitoring your own style so you can adapt yourself to be more effective and more successful and appropriate. All right. As promised, I wanted to talk about uncertainty avoidance and low power, high power distance. Oh boy, these are two really big topics. I can talk about them for quite a bit. So if you find these interesting, send me some messages or let's jump on a Zoom call and we can talk about that. And I can listen too, I promise. All right. So the reason why I want to add intercultural communication is because it really impacts norms. And norms are implicit rules versus explicit rules. So implicit rules are the invisible rules that are usually culture-based, that we don't say out loud and everybody's following. Little kids or people who are new often get a lot more explicit rules. So explicit rules are those rules that we say out loud, that we are going to meta communicate what we want and how we want things to be run and the rules and laws. So if someone breaks a rule, or if someone's new to a group, that's why when you're new on a job, you get a lot of information, is because we're trying to establish the culture. And when you become enculturated into that group, we're no longer hearing those rules anymore, especially if you can really seamlessly start to follow those rules. So uncertainty avoidance culture has, oh my gosh, my dog is now, I'm going to pause and I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back. My dog was scratching at my office door. Here he is. Say hi. Right, I have a dog bed under my beds, under my desk, so he's going to go under there. That's what he likes to do, or he's going to find a place to lay out while I talk. Okay, he doesn't understand why I'm sitting in a room by myself talking to myself, but I'm not talking to myself. I'm imagining my audience, my students. Uncertainty avoidance culture. All right, here we go. So this is a culture where the people in the group, because it's a culture, it's a group dynamic where that group is unwilling to accept ambiguous situations. And by ambiguous, I mean the unknown, or things we're not sure about, that they want to lower the ambiguity. So they make a lot of rules. They want everything to be super literal, direct, to the point. They don't want any other meaning. And if someone is more uncertainty avoidance and they find themselves in new situations or other type of things, they will start trying to make things more rigid. If you've ever worked with someone who is from a more uncertainty avoidance culture, they want to know this and what do you mean by this? And they're going to ask a lot of questions and they're going to want to narrow down meaning to mean just this one little thing, and it doesn't mean anything else. And that's a very they want a to-do list. They want everything to be exact right down to the second on times. I mean, the list goes on, right? And the reason for this is because of safety. People who are coming at situations from an uncertainty avoidance are trying to lower risk and feel safe. So they want a lot of rules. We want a lot of laws. We want a lot of checklists and norms. And in some cultures, that's important. Air traffic controllers, airplane pilots, that is our culture of air travel is a culture of high uncertainty avoidance culture. We want to lower the ambiguous. When I get on a plane, I want to know that that pilot has checklists. I want to know that that pilot is been through rigorous training and is going to keep this plane safe and me safe and the people I love safe. And sometimes there's a lot of reason for it. Now, in some cultures, I think like that movie Internship, the Google movie with Vince Vaughn and Owen Wilson, it has definitely some uncertainty and avoidance on the spectrum, but they are much more low uncertainty avoidance, meaning like, oh, we're going to play games and we're going to be more, we need creativity, we need innovation, we're going to take risks, we're going to not have a lot of rules. And those things mean that we're looking at a workplace structure where creativity and innovation are more highly valued. And that means we need to fail. We need to have a lot more failure. We need to make a lot more mistakes because the belief structure in an uncertainty avoidance culture where there's more ambiguity is that if we make more mistakes, we get better. Because every time we make a mistake, every time we fail, we're actually getting closer to innovation, to technology that is groundbreaking. And so I teach organizational communication, and we look a lot at these management structures. But as this translates to our business communication class, we want to think about how much structure are you looking for or need? Are you feeling safe, or are you willing to take more risks? Or what is the culture around you saying about that? Are there more explicit rules that are really spelled out and there's a lot of reminders about? I would say during COVID-19, because that was such a big thing and it was unknown, we just shut everything down. Go home, close the doors, and let's be safe, right? That's a very high uncertainty avoidance culture response, where some people were like, what? I'm not going to go home. What are we doing? I don't want to wear a mask. I'm going to make my own choices. And that might be someone from a more low uncertainty avoidance perception about safety and risk. So this has a lot of different dynamics. Uncertainty avoidance is from Greek Hofstede theorist. And you could look that up and learn more about that if that sounds interesting. The other culture I wanted to talk about was low power versus high power, distance cultures. And this is important because in the world of business, we're talking a lot about power, right? And those hierarchical impacts on our relationships. So power distance cultures, which is also Hofstede, is also a Hofstede theory, says that it's the people in the culture and how much they're willing to accept that some people in the group will have more privilege and different rules than other people. So how willing are you to accept that some people have different levels of privilege and rules and laws than others? So if we were to take low power or high power, distance, we have the word distance, is that an extreme here might be a king, a monarchy type of government, or a dictatorship style government where there's a really high power element. And if someone's in a culture where we want a king or we support that leader, even if they're a very authoritarian and dictator in their style, we accept that because we want to be safe, right? Again, and we're coming back to that idea of safety and risk. We want that. A very low power might be more of a, we're going to have a democracy. We're going to have a representational government. We want to get all the voices in there. We are going to have a lot more conversations and debates, and then we'll take votes. And that would be on the other side of these. And if we just look at an example to get us into this. But I want to move more into that interpersonal interaction and what's happening for listening dynamics. So, and the way we converse in a conversation. If someone is more high power, so if someone's more high power, it means they accept the authority and they don't question authority, right? So that means that they will have a tendency to roll back a little when someone is talking who has more power than them, and they won't ask a lot of questions. They'll be like, okay, yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. Right? Thank you. I will do that. No questions asked. I will follow orders. And in fact, this brings us to our next book, which I can recommend, is Turn the Ship Around by David Marquette. And actually, if you're not a big reader, he has a Google talk on YouTube, which is excellent. Even though my lecture is long, this talk is a little bit longer, and he's a very dynamic speaker. And he really talks about a true story of turning followers into leaders. And he was a commander of a submarine, and he basically, his goal was to never give an order ever. So what he was trying to do here is he was moving a military situation that's dynamically more high power and moving it into a more, he was trying to squash the power to low power. And low power means that we do not accept that the leader has all the answers. They shouldn't be questioned. We say that we should have access to our leaders. There should be transparency and honesty, and they should be held accountable to the same rules and laws as every single person in the group, right? That they should not have a different set of rules. So that would be a more low power stance. We'll find more low power dynamics in team dynamics and meetings, unless the person who's running the meeting is more high power. And if you're in that meeting, you just got to sit there and you don't really have any way to question, right? Okay. Hopefully you're starting to see the way this comes together, how low power and high power can now impact our workplace. If you are in a meeting with someone who's more low power, they're going to be like, I don't understand why we even have to do this. This doesn't make any sense to me. I've never done anything like this before. They're going to start poking holes at a high power system. They're going to ask a lot more questions. They're going to get the leadership in a defensive place. Either through questioning, mostly through questioning and questioning and questioning and questioning and questioning. I have a question about that. I have a question about that. I have a question about that. And it's to really break down any dynamics of power and they're doing like questions as an offensive and questions that are weaponized to put someone in a defensive place. When we talk about questions in this class and how to ask questions, we do not want to use questions as weapons, right? We want to use questions as a way to expand understanding and be inclusive of other perspectives. Okay. But if you're depending on the situation. Now, sometimes if you have a leader who's more low power, and they are inviting a more expressive style and other types of things, and we want to be more transparent and inclusive and ask me questions, and you have someone who doesn't have power, who's very high power, okay? So you can be high power and not have the power. And if you have a leader who's running a situation in a low power way, this creates a lot of anxiety. They're like, they should just tell us what to do. And they should be exact and specific. And I don't want all this ambiguity. And I just want to know what to do. They will also start to move into an attack position on that leadership style and dismiss it. And this has a tendency to put feminine terms in a more submissive and okay, I don't want to say this the wrong way, but basically using feminine terms as a weapon towards a leadership style. If someone is more high power without power, like they will often use those terms. You might even kind of start to, I don't know if I explained that well enough, but often femininity and terms that relate to women are used as ways to dismiss people and other perspectives, which brings us to the last book I wanted to share with you, which is Talking from 9 to 5, Deborah Tannen, Women and Men at Work. And this book is really interesting because it even though it's an older book, it is a Pulitzer Prize book, but her research is amazing, even though it captures a different time than we are in now about gender. It really looks at the power of feminine and masculine and stereotypes, and how stereotypes really impact our perceptions of what's actually happening. All right. Speaking of listening, I can't wait to listen to your team meetings and not be the speaker always in the class. I think it can be a dynamic and exciting conversation assignment to really build your skills, both as a speaker and a listener. It's really important. So just one thing about team meetings is to really think about how you are interacting. What is the dynamic conversation that you're creating in your meetings? So, for example, this is not like, it's my turn to talk. Boop, start the timer. Let me read my statement. Here is my favorite video, and this is the reason why I chose it. That's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for a more extemporaneous style. I'm looking at how you're coming out strong right at the beginning with vocabulary and your point, and then funneling that down and making room for others. And then I'm looking for how you ask questions or how you do reciprocity for each other, which now we know a little bit more about how that works. So this is great. I really enjoyed sharing this with you today, and I hope I gave you a different way to think about what's happening in an interpersonal communication event. Good luck building your skills, and good luck building your skills as we move forward. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.